The hum of the microwave was a dull throb in the break room, microwave running, coffee still hot. I watched the numbers tick down, each second a tiny, insignificant death in the sterile glow of the display. My own reflection, a pale, tired ghost, stared back from the darkened glass of the machine, a stranger I barely recognized anymore. I cradled my mug, the ceramic warmth a meager comfort against the persistent chill that seemed to have settled deep within my bones. The coffee, black and bitter, was a familiar ritual, one of the few constants left. A colleague, her voice a jarringly bright cheer-up, laughed near the vending machine. I didn't turn. Their chatter, their easy camaraderie, felt like static in my ears, a frequency I no longer tuned into. It had been months since the last one, then months since the one before that. I moved through my days, a silent observer, a phantom in my own life. My work, an endless cycle of data entry and digital filing, offered no solace, only a monotonous rhythm that swallowed hours without consequence. The microwave beeped, a sharp, final note that startled me. I retrieved the steaming bowl of instant noodles, the scent of artificial chicken broth doing little to tempt my appetite. Eating had become another obligation, a necessary fueling of a body that felt increasingly alien. I sat alone at the small laminate table, tracing patterns on its worn surface with a fingertip. The break room emptied slowly, the last vestiges of lunchtime chatter fading to a distant murmur. Then the letter arrived. Not email, not a text, but thick cream paper, a formal envelope, delivered to my desk by an intern who seemed too young, too vibrant for this gray building. My name, Seth, was printed in an elegant, almost old-fashioned script. The return address was a solicitor's office I didn't recognize, tucked away in a district I rarely ventured into. I stared at it for a long moment, my fingers tracing the raised letters of my name. Who still sent letters like this? Inside, the language was precise, legalistic, yet utterly baffling. It spoke of an estate, a distant relative I'd never heard of, a will, my will. It said I was the sole beneficiary of a property, an ancestral home, a house. I read the address, a small, forgotten village nestled deep in the countryside, miles from any major road, a place that didn't even register on my mental map. I called the solicitor's office, my voice raspy from disuse. The solicitor, a man whose clipped tones suggested both efficiency and a faint impatience, confirmed it all. A gray tant, apparently. A woman who had lived a solitary life, and upon her passing had left everything to me, her closest living relative by some convoluted lineage I couldn't fathom. He spoke of crumbling stone, overgrown gardens, a long history. He used words like remote and unmaintained. He didn't say haunted, but the implication hung heavy in the pauses. It's quite a substantial property, Seth, he'd said, his voice softening slightly, perhaps detecting the bewilderment in mine. But it will require significant attention. Significant attention. The phrase felt like a heavy stone dropped into the quiet pool of my aimless existence. My first thought was to refuse, to tell him to sell it, to donate it, to do anything but burden me with a crumbling relic of a family I didn't know. What good was a house to a man who felt like he had no home, no roots, no future? I had no money for renovations, no time for upkeep, and certainly no desire for a project that promised only more solitude. But as the days bled into weeks, the letter lying open on my kitchen counter, the idea began to fester. This wasn't just a house. It was a connection. A thread to a past I didn't know I had, a past that might offer something different. My current life was a stagnant pond, choked with weeds of grief and inertia. Perhaps this was a chance, however improbable, to drain it, to start again. The sheer audacity of it, the complete break from everything familiar, held a strange, unsettling appeal. I told my employer I was leaving. I sold the few pieces of furniture I owned. I packed a single suitcase, mostly books and old clothes. The determination wasn't born of excitement, but of a quiet, desperate need for change. I had nothing left to lose, not really. The drive was long, the landscape gradually shedding the familiar signs of civilization. Roads narrowed, trees grew taller and denser, swallowing the light. My phone's signal flickered, then died. The GPS on the dashboard became a lonely blue line, cutting through a vast green emptiness. It felt less like an invitation and more like a summons. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, I saw it. Tucked away at the end of a winding, overgrown lane, shrouded by ancient oaks, stood the house. A silhouette against the dying light, vast and impossibly old. It loomed, silent and imposing, an undeniable presence. What kind of fresh start could possibly begin in a place so utterly unknown? The phrase from the solicitor, significant attention, had clung to me like a damp cloth. It was still there, heavy and cold, as I sat in the break room, microwave running, coffee still hot. The insistent hum of the machine did little to drown out the echoes in my own head. What good was a house to a man who felt? The end of that thought, the one that had hung unfinished in my mind, was nothing. I felt like nothing, a shadow moving through rooms, barely making a ripple. But the solicitor had been persistent, his voice a low, steady current against my apathy. He'd spoken of a fresh start, of roots, words that felt alien and oddly seductive in my barren landscape. I picked up the lukewarm mug, the ceramic heavy in my hand. The steam rising from the coffee barely warmed my face. Outside the window, the city pulsed with its usual indifferent energy, a stark contrast to the quiet, dusty corners of my own life. A fresh start. I needed something. The house, distant and unknown, represented a drastic change, a forced redirection. Maybe that was what I needed. Not a new home, perhaps, but a new direction, even if it led into the unknown. So I signed the papers. The solicitor gave me a thin, knowing smile, handed me a heavy, ornate key on a simple iron ring, and wished me well. His eyes seemed to hold a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher, sympathy, or perhaps a strange sort of anticipation. I didn't ask, I just took the key. The drive was long, a tedious unraveling of familiar roads into increasingly unfamiliar ones. The highway gave way to state routes, then county roads, and finally tracks of crumbling asphalt barely wide enough for one car. The landscape shifted with each mile, the neat rows of suburban development dissolving into sprawling fields, then dense, ancient woodlands. The trees grew taller here, their branches intertwining overhead, creating tunnels of perpetual twilight. I passed fewer and fewer cars, then none at all. The last sign of civilization was a rusted mailbox leaning precariously by a dirt track that vanished into a thicket of overgrown evergreens. Beyond that, it was just me, the car, and the encroaching forest. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. A shiver traced its way down my spine, unrelated to the temperature. It was the feeling of being utterly alone, a sensation I had grown accustomed to, but one that felt different here, more profound, more absolute. Then through a break in the trees, I saw it. The house. It wasn't what I expected, and yet it was precisely what the solicitor's vague descriptions had implied. Vast, imposing, a hulking silhouette against the bruised afternoon sky. It was a monument to neglect, a decaying leviathan of stone and timber sprawling across a rise in the land. A long, winding driveway, choked with weeds and cracked pavement, led up to what must have once been a grand entrance. A rusted iron gate, half open, hung crookedly on a single hinge, groaning softly in the faint breeze. I parked the car near the gate, the engine ticking as it cooled. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood and forgotten perfume. My hand trembled as I reached for the heavy key. It groaned in protest as I pushed it open, a sound that echoed through the cavernous entrance hall. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak sunlight filtering through the grimy fanlight above. I stepped inside, my footsteps muffled by a thick layer of dust and what felt like years of forgotten sorrow. The house felt less like a dwelling and more like a mausoleum. My initial exploration was tentative. Each room I entered was a tableau of abandonment, furniture draped in ghostly white sheets like spectral figures awaiting a resurrection. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional creak of settling timber or the whisper of my own movement. I ran my hand over a dusty banister, the wood surprisingly smooth beneath the grime. The sheer size of the place was overwhelming. How could one person, even an entire family, fill such an expanse? It felt too big, too empty, too hungry. I stopped, my heart giving a clumsy lurch against my ribs. I spun around, but there was nothing. It was probably the wind, I told myself, filtering through a loose pane or the house settling. Old houses made noises, that was just a fact. But then as I paused by a tall, curtained window, a floorboard creaked distinctly behind me. Not a settling groan, but a sharp, deliberate sound, like a footstep. My breath hitched. I stood frozen, straining my ears, but the house remained silent, utterly, unnervingly silent. Was it just my imagination playing tricks in this vast, decaying space, or was I truly alone? What good was a house to? A ghost? No, I stopped myself. To someone like me, I corrected. Someone who felt like a ghost already, drifting through the days, leaving no mark. The steam from my mug fogged the cheap plastic lid, mirroring the haze in my own mind. I picked at a loose thread on my sleeve, the rough fabric a small anchor in the swirling unease. The drive home was a blur of gray asphalt and dying light. The old pickup truck grumbled its way down the winding dirt road, kicking up dust that settled on the withered autumn foliage. Each turn brought me deeper into the woods, deeper into the quiet, and further from the mundane drone of the city. The house loomed, a gaunt silhouette against the bruised purple sky. It wasn't just old. It felt ancient, rooted in the very earth. Its dark windows like vacant eyes watching my approach. Inside, the silence was immediate and profound, a thick blanket woven from dust and disuse. It pressed against my ears, making them ring. Each floorboard creaked a complaint under my weight. Each gust of wind outside sounded like a sigh against the rattling panes. I told myself it was just the house settling, a natural consequence of age and neglect. But even as I said the words in my head, a prickle of unease started to spread like static electricity across my skin. I was in the study trying to make sense of the scattered papers and half-empty inkwells the previous owner had left behind. My eyes kept darting to the periphery, a quick, involuntary flick. My breath hitched. I spun around, my heart giving a sudden, violent thud against my ribs. Nothing. My imagination, I decided, rubbing my eyes, tiredness, the stress of the past few months. That was all it was. I pulled my sweater tighter. Then I heard it. It was so faint, so fleeting, that it might have been the rustle of leaves outside or the groan of the old pipes. But it seemed to originate from within the house, a breathy, sibilant sound like someone trying to clear their throat or perhaps a secret shared in a hushed tone. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding ridiculously loud in the sudden stillness. Only the furnace answered, its mechanical cough echoing from below. I waited, straining my ears, but the sound didn't return. I ate quickly, the food tasteless, then retreated to the bedroom I'd claimed. It was the least dusty, the one with a view of the overgrown garden rather than the dense woods. I had meticulously arranged my few belongings, a stack of books, my old alarm clock, a small, ornate wooden music box that had belonged to my mother. I'd placed it on the bedside table, its delicate inlay gleaming faintly in the dim light. It was a comfort, a small piece of my past in this vast, alien present. The next morning, the sun was a pale smear behind the clouds, casting the house in a perpetual twilight. I went about my routine, making coffee, checking emails on my laptop. When I returned to the bedroom to retrieve a book, I stopped dead in the doorway. The music box. It wasn't on the bedside table where I'd left it. It was on the small, claw-footed dressing table across the room, nestled amongst a collection of tarnished silver hairbrushes and an empty perfume bottle. My stomach clenched. I knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't moved it. I had placed it with care, almost reverently, on the bedside table. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Had I moved it in my sleep? A bizarre bout of sleepwalking? Unlikely. I hadn't sleepwalked since I was a child. Had I been so distracted, so tired, that I'd simply forgotten where I'd put it? I walked over, my footsteps heavy on the creaking floorboards. The music box sat there, innocent and still, reflecting the gray light from the window. I picked it up. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I blinked, trying to clear my head. This was absurd. I was alone in this house. There was no one else. I placed the music box back on the bedside table, precisely where it had been before. I even took a mental snapshot of its position, next to my alarm clock, angled just so. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my grip. I needed to see it stay put. But as I turned to leave the room, my gaze snagged on the dressing table again. Had that silver hairbrush been facing the other way, or was I just imagining things now, creating mysteries where none existed? What good was a house to me if it was rotting from the inside, if it held something? Unseen. The question burned. It wasn't just about a fresh start anymore. It was about understanding what I'd inherited, what I'd stumbled into. My initial aimlessness had been replaced by a gnawing curiosity, a determination to peel back the layers of this place. I drained the lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste a stark contrast to the saccharine promises of a new beginning. I needed to go back, not just to move my things, but to look, to listen, to search. The drive back to the house felt different this time. The usual trepidation was still there, a knot in my stomach, but it was now laced with a strange resolve. The old house loomed against the bruised afternoon sky, its windows like vacant eyes. It didn't look welcoming. It looked watchful. I pushed open the heavy front door, the groan of hinges echoing through the cavernous foyer. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of dust, damp earth, and something else I couldn't quite place, a faint, metallic tang, like old blood or perhaps just rust. I told myself it was just an old house settling, that was all. But the silence that followed the door's protest was absolute, a blanket muffling even the distant chirping of birds. I moved slowly, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the warped floorboards. A sign, a flicker. My heart beat a steady, dull rhythm against my ribs. Then it happened. It clung to my skin, seeped into my clothes, raising gooseflesh along my arms. My breath misted, a visible puff in the stagnant air. It was distinct, an invisible wall of frigid air, perhaps 3 feet wide, extending from the floor to just above my head. The sound felt absurd, childish, no answer. I backed away slowly, my eyes still fixed on the spot. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Old pipes, a structural defect causing a localized thermal anomaly. It was a pathetic attempt. Even to me, I continued my exploration, moving into the dining room, then the kitchen. Each room felt heavy, imbued with a history I couldn't grasp. As I ascended the grand staircase, the wooden steps creaked beneath my weight, but I swore I heard other creaks, lighter ones, from the floor above me or perhaps just ahead. I paused, listening intently. The house groaned, settling, I told myself. It was just the house. Upstairs, the feeling intensified. The air grew thicker, heavier. In what I assumed was the master bedroom, a faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound emanated from behind a locked wardrobe. It wasn't the scurrying of mice, it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. Like fingernails dragging across wood, then pausing, then dragging again. My stomach tightened. I leaned closer, straining to hear. It was so faint I questioned if I'd even heard it, but the prickle on my neck was real. I retreated, my determination battling with a growing surge of fear. I needed answers, not just more questions. I pulled out my phone, the screen a tiny beacon in the gloom. I typed Blackwood Manor history into the search bar, then unexplained phenomena Blackwood Manor. The internet was a vast, chaotic ocean, and I was looking for a single lost pearl. The results were sparse. Local history sites mentioned the manor's construction in the late 1800s, its various owners a prominent merchant, a reclusive academic, a family who vanished without a trace, the lineage ending abruptly. There were vague references to unfortunate events and a string of peculiar misfortunes. One archived local newspaper clipping, grainy and faded, spoke of a previous owner, a woman who descended into a profound melancholia and was eventually taken away for her own good. No mention of what caused it. No mention of where she went. I clicked on an old forum post from years ago. A user had written, "My grandmother used to tell stories about Blackwood Manor," just a single unsettling comment. This online research was a dead end of vague folklore and hearsay. I needed something tangible. I remembered the solicitor mentioning old records, boxes stored in the house itself. I had seen them stacked in a dusty alcove off the main study just behind a heavy, carved oak desk. With a renewed sense of purpose, I made my way to the study. The air felt like a physical weight on my chest. I located the alcove, pulling aside a moth-eaten tapestry to reveal a stack of wooden crates and leather-bound boxes. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light piercing the grimy window. I ran my hand over the top box. The wood felt strangely smooth, almost polished, despite the layers of grit. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled amongst brittle newspaper clippings and yellowed legal documents, lay a series of bound journals. I picked one up, its weight substantial in my hand. The first page bore a date, October 17, 1898. This was it, a personal account, a voice from the past. I flipped through the pages, my fingers careful not to tear the fragile paper. The entries started innocuously enough descriptions of daily life, the weather, social calls. But as I turned more pages, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew more frantic, the lines more crowded. It settles in the corners, then creeps into my bones. They speak my name now. My husband, the dear man, says it is only my grief, my mind playing tricks. He does not hear the voice that promises to make everything stop. I fear it is not grief that twists my thoughts, but something else entirely. Something ancient and hungry. It wants more than just my sorrow. It wants me. My gaze fell upon the next line, scrawled in a hand that had become almost illegible, the ink bleeding slightly into the paper. It was a single, stark sentence, followed by a crude, disturbing drawing a distorted skeletal figure with long, grasping tendrils reaching out from its form. It lives in the loneliness. The journal fell from my trembling fingers, landing with a soft thud on the dusty floor. What had truly happened to the woman who wrote these words? And what did it mean for me? The journal lay on the floor, a silent accusation. I stared at the crude drawing, the distorted face, the frantic scrawl of the woman's last words. It took her, it's here. My breath caught in my throat, a dry rasp. What had she seen? What had she known? A cold spike of dread, sharp and insistent, pierced through the exhaustion that had been my constant companion. This wasn't just a house. It was a mausoleum of forgotten terrors, and I was now inside. I bent, my fingers trembling as I picked up the leather-bound book. The dust on its cover felt like ancient skin. I needed answers, not just for the woman who wrote these desperate lines, but for myself. What did her fate mean for mine? I couldn't just leave it, couldn't pretend I hadn't seen. My search began in earnest. The initial shock gave way to a grim determination. I scoured the study, the library, even the musty, unused bedrooms, seeking anything that spoke of the house's past. Days blurred into a haze of dust and old paper. I found more than I bargained for. Tucked away in a forgotten chest in the attic, beneath moth-eaten blankets, were bundles of yellowed newspapers, brittle letters, and several more journals, some barely legible, others mere fragments. The first newspaper clipping, dated 1897, detailed the sudden disappearance of a prominent local merchant and his entire family. Vanished without a trace. The headline screamed, bordered by faded black ink. No signs of forced entry, no ransom notes, just an empty house and a lingering sense of unease reported by the neighbors. I'd felt them. I found a collection of letters from a distant relative, a woman named Alina, writing to a distant cousin in the 1950s. Her initial letters were full of excitement about inheriting the property, her plans for renovation. But as the dates progressed, the tone shifted. Her handwriting became spidery, erratic. "The nights are long here, cousin. Such a profound loneliness settles upon the spirit. I hear things, not voices, not exactly, but suggestions. They shift, they watch. I see it in the periphery, a movement, a flicker of something vast and ancient. It wants to know me. It wants to be me." The last letter, dated 3 months after the first, was a single, smudged sentence. "I cannot fight it anymore. It knows my deepest sorrow." Then nothing more, no follow-up letters, no mention of her fate. My head throbbed. Madness, disappearances, tragic ends. A pattern, stark and terrifying, began to emerge from the fragments. Each story, each desperate plea painted a picture of lives slowly eroded, minds twisted by an unseen presence. This wasn't just a house with a history, it was a predator patiently waiting for its next meal. I kept reading, desperate to find an answer, a weakness, anything that could give me an edge. But exhaustion eventually claimed me. I was in the house, but it was wrong. The walls warped, breathing like some monstrous lung. They weren't words, not precisely, but a language of despair, a resonance of grief. "Seth." The sound was a caress, yet it made my skin crawl. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't human. I saw faces in the shifting gloom. The terrified merchant, the reclusive eccentric, Alina with her frantic eyes, and the woman from the journal, her drawn face frozen in a silent scream. They were trapped, their essence somehow interwoven with the fabric of the house, and I was joining them. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a sensation of something trying to push its way into my thoughts to replace them with its own. Doubt seeped in, thick and suffocating. Was I truly seeing this, or was my mind already beginning to unravel just like theirs? I woke with a gasp, my body rigid, a thin sheen of sweat on my skin. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I sat up, clutching the blankets, trying to ground myself in reality. But the line between waking and dreaming felt impossibly thin, stretched taut and fragile. The entity had found me in my sleep. It was inside my head. What did it want from me? It took her. What had she seen? A cold spike of dread, sharp and insistent, lanced through me. I pushed myself away from the table, the old wood groaning under my weight. The floorboards felt cold beneath my bare feet, a clammy chill that seeped into my bones. The heavy velvet curtains, the dusty bookshelves, the portrait of a stern-faced ancestor all seemed to hold their breath, watching me. I told myself it was just the late hour, the isolation, the effect of the journal's morbid contents. I had to tell myself that to believe anything else. It felt like stepping off a cliff. I knelt, picking up the journal with a hesitant touch. Below it, a single looping word, empty. My own throat tightened. Empty, that's how I'd felt after everything. A chasm. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the hallway. I froze, every muscle tensing. It sounded like a branch snapping or heavy wood splitting. I waited, straining my ears. But there was only the house's usual symphony of creaks and groans, the wind sighing through ill-fitting window frames. My imagination, I decided. Just my imagination, frayed thin by the unsettling discoveries. I stood, the journal clutched tight in my hand, and forced myself to walk to the study door. I flicked the wall switch. Nothing. The bulb must have finally given out. A shiver traced its way down my spine. I retreated, fumbling for my phone's flashlight. I needed to clear my head to ground myself. Food, coffee, something normal. I made my way through the labyrinthine corridors, the flashlight beam dancing ahead, revealing glimpses of peeling wallpaper and forgotten furniture draped in white sheets. I found myself in the break room, microwave running, coffee still hot. The low hum of the appliance was a jarring anomaly in the quiet house, a mechanical heartbeat where there should have been none, and the coffee. I hadn't made coffee. It steamed gently in a chipped ceramic mug on the counter, a faint aroma of stale grounds and something else. Something metallic, almost like old pennies. I stared at it, my mind racing. Had I made it? Had I forgotten? My memory felt like a sieve, leaking details, blurring the edges of recent events. I remembered putting the journal down. But had I wandered in here, made coffee, turned on the microwave, and then gone back to the study? It felt wrong. The microwave timer ticked down, a slow, deliberate count. 3, 2, 1, beep. The loud sound made me jump, my hand flying to my chest. Inside, a plate of something indistinguishable sat, half-eaten. It looked like congealed oatmeal or perhaps some kind of grayish gruel. I hadn't cooked anything. I hadn't eaten anything in hours, not a sound from the room, but in my head. Alone. The word curled around my thoughts, a venomous suggestion. I stumbled back, knocking against the counter. The coffee mug wobbled, then righted itself. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the heels of my hands into my temples. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. The grief, the isolation, it was finally getting to me. I was cracking. I opened my eyes. The break room was the same. Microwave still beeping, coffee still steaming. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the floorboards. I felt it through my feet, a low, resonant thrum. It wasn't the house settling. It felt deliberate. Then I heard it again, clearer this time, a voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Unwanted. The word hit me like a physical blow, striking at the deepest, most tender part of my own history. My father's dismissive tone, my mother's sad, distant gaze after he left. The feeling of being surplus, an afterthought, the entity knew it was digging. My hands started to shake, a tremor that spread through my entire body. The coffee, still hot, seemed to mock me with its false promise of normalcy. Who had made it? Who had left the microwave running? Had I done it, or was something else? Playing games. I burst into what I thought was the living room, only to find myself in a small, windowless pantry, shelves lined with jars of pickled vegetables I'd never seen before. A faint, sweet-sour smell hung in the air. My heart seized. I fumbled frantically for the doorknob, my fingers slick with sweat. It turned freely, but the door wouldn't open. It was stuck or locked or something else. I pushed, I pulled, I shoulder-barged, but it remained stubbornly sealed. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of earth and decay. I could hear something breathing nearby, a shallow, wet sound like air being drawn through a constricted throat. It was close, too close. Worthless, forgotten, mine. I pressed myself against the opposite wall, clawing at the rough plaster. The breathing grew louder, closer. What was in here with me? What did it want? My mind screamed, trying to find a foothold in the crumbling reality around me. Was I truly trapped, or was this another cruel illusion, another twisted trick designed to break me? Another twisted fragment of my own fracturing mind? The breathing stopped, just like that. One moment, a guttural, wet inhale filling the narrow corridor, vibrating the very floorboards beneath my trembling feet. The next, absolute silence. A silence so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down, a vacuum sucking all sound from the world. My own ragged gasps were deafening in comparison. I slid down the wall, legs giving out, my back scraping against the rough plaster. My chest heaved, each breath a desperate, shallow struggle. Nothing, just the faint, stale scent of dust and something metallic like old blood or rust. My skin crawled, 1,000 phantom fingers tracing patterns on my arms. It was gone, or it had simply chosen to withdraw. The thought offered no comfort. It only meant it was still here, lurking, watching, waiting for its next moment to strike. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. I had to get out, or at least get to a phone. The mobile in my pocket was useless, a dead weight since I'd arrived. But there had to be a landline somewhere in this sprawling, forgotten place. There always was in these old homes, a relic of a time before constant connection. My determination, a fragile ember in the hurricane of my fear, flickered brighter. I wouldn't just cower. I wouldn't let this thing consume me, not like it had consumed everything else. Each creak of the floorboards, each groan of the ancient house sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I passed rooms filled with shrouded furniture, their forms like ghostly figures beneath white sheets. The air grew heavier, thicker, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Then a faint, almost imperceptible hum. It was distant but distinct from the house's usual symphony of decay, a mechanical drone. I followed the sound, my steps hesitant, turning a corner into a smaller, unexpectedly modern-looking space. It was a break room, microwave running, coffee still hot. Sudden normalcy was jarring. Had I walked into another illusion? Was this a trick? I approached the counter slowly, my eyes scanning every inch of the room. A small refrigerator hummed. A stack of old magazines lay on a table. Everything looked normal, too normal. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the warm ceramic of the mug. It was real. The heat seeped into my fingertips, a strange comfort. A small, yellow, sticky note was affixed to the mug. My name, scrawled in neat, elegant handwriting. Seth. My heart seized. No one else was here. No one knew I drank coffee. No one knew I even existed in this place. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but a thought that blossomed directly in my mind, perfectly formed, utterly clear. It wasn't threatening, not like the breathing. It was soft, inviting. I spun around, but the room was empty. The microwave continued its low hum. The coffee steamed. You never have to be alone again. This time the words felt like a caress, a gentle pressure behind my eyes, and with them a flicker. A memory sharp and vivid of my mother's smile, of her laughter, of the warmth of her hand in mine. Then my father, his reassuring presence, his quiet strength. They were gone, lost. And the loneliness had been a constant ache, a gnawing emptiness that this house seemed to amplify. But here now, in this sterile break room, a different feeling began to bloom, a sense of belonging, of being understood. The entity, whatever it was, knew my grief, it knew my pain, and it was offering something. My breath hitched, to bring them back in some way. The thought was intoxicating, a dangerous siren song. It was a lie, I knew it was. But the part of me that was desperate, the part that missed them so acutely it physically hurt, yearned for it. I stared at the coffee mug, my name on the sticky note. It was a personalized invitation, a bespoke trap. The microwave beeped softly, its cycle finished. The blinking 12:00 seemed to mock me. What kind of comfort was this, and what would it demand in return? And the loneliness. It had been a hook, sharp and barbed, digging into the raw wound of my grief. It had threatened to pull me under, to drown me in the very memories I cherished. But I wouldn't let it. Not again. I clenched my jaw, pushing away the spectral tendrils that sought to wrap around my heart. This wasn't just a house. This was a cage, and I was not a bird to be broken. Not yet. I needed to clear my head to find some semblance of the real world. Something solid, something predictable. The kitchen felt too charged, too close to the source of the whispers. My footsteps echoed hollowly as I moved through the silent corridors, a strange weight settling on my shoulders. It was the house, I knew, pressing down, trying to stifle my resolve. But I kept moving, driven by a stubborn refusal to yield. My fingers wrapped around the ceramic, feeling the warmth, a small anchor in the rising tide of unease. I watched the microwave's timer tick down, each digit a tiny leap towards an arbitrary end. It was so mundane, so ordinary, and for a fleeting moment I almost believed I could simply exist here, untouched. Then the hum shifted. Not the steady thrum of the microwave, but a deeper vibration coming from beneath my feet. It was subtle at first, a faint tremor like a distant heavy truck passing. I frowned, glancing down at the worn linoleum. The house was old, constantly settling, I told myself. Just the house. But the tremor intensified, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated up through the soles of my shoes, through my bones. The mug in my hand began to rattle faintly against the saucer I hadn't realized I'd picked up. My gaze snapped to the walls. They were painted a faded, sickly yellow, peeling in places. As I watched, a hairline crack, barely visible before, seemed to deepen. It wasn't just a static line. It was moving. A spiderweb of fissures bloomed from it, spreading across the plaster like veins under skin. They pulsed almost imperceptibly, as if something vast and slow was breathing beneath the surface. My breath caught in my throat. The microwave timer chimed, jarringly loud, signaling the end of its cycle. I didn't move. The tremor was now a violent shudder. The coffee in my mug sloshed, nearly spilling, its surface rippling like disturbed water. A faint, acrid smell began to fill the air, not of burning plastic, but something older, fouler, like damp earth mixed with decay. It stung my nostrils, making my eyes water. A dull thud sounded from directly above me, followed by a shower of plaster dust. I flinched, instinctively raising an arm to shield my face. More cracks appeared on the ceiling, branching out, spidering towards the central light fixture. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. This wasn't settling. This wasn't old age. A section of the ceiling directly above the sink groaned, a deep, tearing sound that made my teeth ache. A large chunk of plaster detached itself, falling with a wet smack into the basin, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. I stumbled back, my feet catching on something, nearly dropping the coffee mug. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip it. The floor beneath me buckled, not a gentle dip, but a sharp, sudden lurch that threw me off balance. I cried out, scrambling for purchase, my back hitting the wall with a painful jolt. The wall itself felt alive, vibrating against my spine, the cracks now so numerous they formed a shifting, chaotic pattern. I could hear a low, grinding sound like stone on stone coming from everywhere and nowhere. The entire room was twisting. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to make sense of the chaos, trying to force it back into the realm of the rational. But when I opened them, the reality was worse. The break room was no longer a break room. The walls had begun to warp, the lines of the doorframe bending, stretching, as if viewed through distorted glass. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing down on my chest. I couldn't breathe. There was no escape. The windows, which had seemed so solid moments ago, were now obscured by what looked like thick, gnarled roots pressing against the glass from the outside, blocking out the last sliver of natural light. They pulsed with the same slow, sickening rhythm as the walls. The door, my only clear exit, seemed to shrink, its frame contorting, becoming too narrow, too low. I pressed myself against the shuddering wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The house wasn't just old. It was alive, and it was closing in. The tendrils of loneliness had tried to ensnare me, a familiar, suffocating embrace, but I had fought them off. My jaw ached from the clenching, my muscles tense, but I wouldn't let it win. Not again. I had seen the flickering images, the whispered suggestions, the way it tried to twist my memories into weapons against myself. I was done with being a victim. A raw, unfamiliar determination had taken root in my gut. I needed answers, not just vague suspicions. The house held secrets, I knew that much. Its very walls hummed with them, a low, constant vibration beneath the floorboards, behind the peeling wallpaper. I had to find where they were hidden. My search had been methodical, driven by a frantic energy that verged on obsession. I'd torn through dusty attics, pried open locked cupboards in the library, even tapped along the cold stone of the cellar walls. Days bled into nights, the only light the beam of my flashlight cutting through the gloom, the only sound the scuttling of unseen things and my own ragged breath. Then in the study, behind a false panel disguised by an ornate carved bookend, I found it. Not a treasure chest, not gold, but something far more valuable, far more terrifying. A leather-bound journal, its cover brittle, its pages yellowed and warped by time and damp. The script inside was tight, meticulous, almost frantic in places. It belonged to a former occupant, a woman, judging by the elegant looping of her F's and S's. Her entries spanned years, beginning with hopeful observations about the house, then slowly, insidiously shifting into something darker. I needed to read it, to understand. I took the journal to the small, sterile annex off the main kitchen, a space that felt strangely out of place in the ancient house. It had a cheap laminate counter, a couple of mismatched chairs, and a small, humming refrigerator. This was the break room, microwave running, coffee still hot. I'd plugged in the old microwave myself, a desperate attempt to create a sliver of normalcy, a corner of the house that felt less like a tomb. The bitter smell of stale coffee from my mug mingled with the faint, metallic scent of the appliance and the ever-present must of the house. I pulled a chair to the small table, the worn plastic protesting with a groan, and opened the journal. The first entries were mundane, observations on the weather, details about gardening, the arrival of new servants. She spoke of a quiet life, of finding peace after a personal loss. A widow like me seeking solace. It was too familiar. Then, the tone shifted. She wrote about the loneliness, how it wasn't just her loneliness but something that seemed to seep from the very stones of the house, amplifying her own. "It is a living thing," she scribbled, "a presence that feeds, it grows stronger with my sorrow." My breath hitched. This was it, the truth. She described a slow erosion, not of her sanity, but of herself. The entity didn't just cause despair, it consumed it. It wants me to believe I am alone, truly alone, utterly beyond help. I swallowed, a dry, rasping sound in the quiet room. The microwave's hum seemed to intensify, a low thrumming that vibrated in my teeth. My coffee, forgotten, steamed gently, a ghost of warmth. The journal revealed its ancient origins. "It is not a ghost, not a spirit," he had written, her hand shaking so badly the ink bled on the page. "It is older, primal, tied to the very earth beneath this place, to the lines of sorrow that crisscross this land. It was here before the house, before any of us. The house is merely its anchor, its lure, a trap built around a hungry maw." A trap! I was in a trap. Her next entries detailed the entity's true motive. It didn't just feed on loneliness and grief, it harvested them. It takes the purest essence of human despair, the concentrated anguish, and uses it too, to sustain itself. To manifest. It wasn't just a monster that haunted. It was a parasite that needed to create suffering to exist. And the house, my ancestral home, was its hunting ground. Every previous occupant, every person who had sought solace within these walls after a loss, had been a victim. A meal. My eyes scanned the frantic, barely legible lines. "It doesn't kill quickly. That would be too merciful. It drains slowly, savoring the fear, the isolation. It strips away identity, until nothing is left but a shell, a vessel, and then it takes the vessel too to become one with it. To walk in the world again. This thing wasn't just an ethereal presence. It had a goal. It wanted to manifest physically, to become human, or at least human-shaped, by stealing a body. My body. The microwave dinged, its sudden, sharp sound making me jump, nearly throwing the journal across the room. I gasped, my heart racing. The coffee was still hot, but I couldn't feel its warmth. My hands trembled, the paper rustling. I looked up away from the journal into the small, stark break room. The air felt heavy, pressing down on me. I was not alone. It knew. It had always known. What did it mean to become one with it? And if it had done this before, where were the previous inhabitants? Had they simply vanished, or were they, still here in some unspeakable form? By S. The thought, unfinished, still echoed in my skull. A chilling pronouncement. To walk in the world again. It wasn't enough for this thing to simply exist within these walls, a parasitic shadow feeding on my grief. It wanted out. It wanted a body, my body. I wouldn't just be consumed, I'd be replaced. This wasn't a slow decay anymore, it was an invasion. I had to fight. I spent the next few hours meticulously retracing my steps, not through the house, but through my own scattered memories. It thrived on sorrow, on isolation. My vulnerability was its strength. So my strength had to come from the opposite, not hope, not joy, for those felt alien to me now, but defiance. My plan was simple, perhaps foolish, but it was my plan. I would starve it. I would deny it the emotional sustenance it craved. I would empty myself, become a barren landscape it couldn't root in. And then I would leave. Not just walk out the door, which I now knew was an illusion, but break its hold, sever the invisible ties that bound me to this place. I remembered the old diary entries, the warnings of the previous occupants. They had tried to escape, to fight, to cleanse. They had all failed. But I had a piece of the puzzle they hadn't fully grasped. It wasn't just the house, it was me. My internal landscape was its hunting ground. I moved through the decaying halls with a newfound purpose, a grim determination that felt like a shield against the creeping unease. The floorboards groaned beneath my boots, each creak a familiar complaint. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy windows, momentarily distracting from the suffocating gloom. These were its minor tricks, its attempts to sow fear. I would not yield. My objective was the cellar, a place I'd avoided since the first unsettling encounter. It felt like the heart of the house, the deepest root of its malevolence. If I could confront it there in its lair, perhaps I could sever something. I clutched a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, its cold metal a reassuring weight in my sweaty palm. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and acrid like old blood. I fumbled for the old lantern I'd brought, my fingers clumsy. Empty shelves lined the stone walls, their surfaces slick with moisture. A low, guttural hum vibrated through the floor, a sound I hadn't noticed before, too subtle to identify until now. It was alive. I walked further into the gloom, my heart racing. Each step was deliberate, a challenge. I could feel its gaze, a prickling sensation on my neck, but I saw nothing. It was waiting. It was always waiting. Then the floor changed. The rough stone beneath my boots suddenly gave way to a smooth, tiled surface. The temperature shifted, from frigid to a sterile warmth. The metallic, earthy smell vanished, replaced by something artificial, vaguely chemical like disinfectant. It wasn't the suffocating black of the cellar. There was a faint, fluorescent glow bleeding in from somewhere nearby. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, trying to clear the sudden disorientation. When I opened them again, I was no longer in the cellar. I stood on linoleum, a dull beige-yellow pattern. To my left, a counter stretched, topped with a coffee maker that hissed softly, steam curling from its spout. Next to it, a microwave glowed with an internal light, its low hum joining the quiet gurgle of the coffee maker. The air here was stale, thick with the smell of old coffee and something faintly burnt, like popcorn left too long. I was in a break room, microwave running, coffee still hot. My hand still clutched the iron poker, an absurd weapon in this mundane, fluorescent-lit purgatory. The walls were painted a faded institutional green. A bulletin board, tacked with curling notices about safety procedures and upcoming events, hung crookedly beside a water cooler. This wasn't the cellar. This wasn't even the house. It was too clean, too modern, too ordinary. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the impossible shift. Had I lost my grip entirely? Was this a memory? A hallucination? I stumbled towards the door I could now see at the far end of the room, my boots making a sticky sound on the linoleum. The door was a standard fire exit, a red bar across its width. Freedom. Escape. I reached for the bar, my fingers trembling, the iron poker falling with a clatter onto the floor. As my palm pressed against the cold metal, a voice, not a whisper, but a clear, resonant tone, filled the small room. It was my own voice, yet it wasn't. It spoke words I had thought, words I had felt, words I had buried deep. I tried to starve me, Seth, but I am the meal. The red bar on the door pulsed with a faint, sickly light like a vein under skin. It wasn't an exit, it was a trap. The microwave's hum grew louder, a low thrum that vibrated through the floorboards, through my bones. The coffee maker hissed, and the smell of burnt popcorn intensified, making my stomach churn. This wasn't a physical place. It was a prison constructed from my own mind, my own longing for normalcy, twisted into something inescapable. The ritual / the feeding my stomach lurched, threatening to spill the bitterness that had been curdling there for days. The break room, microwave running, coffee still hot, felt less like a room and more like a pressurized chamber. Every surface vibrated. The red bar on the door, a sickly vein under skin, pulsed faster now, a frantic beat that mirrored the frantic drum against my ribs. It wasn't an exit, it was a trap. The coffee maker hissed and the smell of burnt popcorn intensified, making my throat tighten. My eyes stung. The air grew thick like breathing through a shroud. I tasted ash and something else, something metallic and ancient, a tang of forgotten earth. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting the room into a strobe-lit nightmare. Each flash revealed the walls buckling, the cheap linoleum floor rippling like dark water. My vision swam. The sounds, once distinct, began to merge into a single grinding drone, a sound that wasn't just heard but felt, a vibration through every nerve ending. It was trying to unravel me. A cold certainty settled in my gut. This was it. The moment of truth. The entity wasn't just influencing me anymore. It was here in this room, inside my head, preparing to feast. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, a terrible weight pushing down on my skull. It felt like my mind was being squeezed, wrung out like a wet cloth. Memories, fragmented and distorted, flashed before me. The empty chair in the living room, the hushed voices of the funeral, the cold silence of the house after everyone left. Each image was sharper, more painful than the last, amplified by an unseen force. Grief, raw and debilitating, surged through me, threatening to drown me. Loneliness, a crushing weight, pressed down, suffocating. Despair, a black tide, rose to meet it. This was its food. This was the ritual. I stumbled back, my hand slapping against the counter, the burning heat of the still-hot coffee maker briefly cutting through the haze. A jolt of pain, sharp and immediate. It wasn't enough. The entity was pulling at the threads of my sanity, unraveling them one by one. It wanted to consume me whole, to leave nothing but an empty shell. My legs trembled, my breath hitched. I was losing. Then a flicker. It wasn't a memory of loss, but of warmth, a moment. My mother years ago, her hands flour-dusted, humming a tune as she baked. The smell of cinnamon and rising dough, not burnt popcorn. Her smile, wide and genuine, not the twisted grins I'd seen in the periphery of my vision. It was so real, so vibrant, it felt like a physical shield against the encroaching gloom. The entity recoiled just a fraction. I felt it, a momentary hesitation in its overwhelming assault. It was a tiny crack, a single beam of sunlight piercing the storm. I clung to it, my name. My name. I pushed back, not with anger, but with the force of that memory. The sheer, unadulterated love in her eyes, the feeling of her arms around me. It was everything the entity wasn't. It fed on despair. This was hope. It thrived on loneliness. This was connection. I focused, pushing that memory forward, letting it expand, letting it burn away the fog. The pressure in my head eased ever so slightly. The room, for a fleeting second, seemed to solidify, the walls holding their shape. The entity didn't retreat, not fully, but its grip slackened. I could feel its fury, a low, guttural snarl that vibrated through the floorboards, through my very bones. It didn't like this. It didn't like being denied its meal. I was still weak, still trapped in the break room. Microwave running, coffee still hot, but I was fighting. I was pushing back with something it couldn't touch, something it couldn't corrupt. My own strength. A memory, a defiance, but how long could I hold it? My stomach lurched, threatening to spill the bitterness that had been curdling there for days. The red bar on the door, a sickly vein under skin, pulsed faster now, a furious beat against the cheap laminate. I could hear it, the hum of the microwave growing into a shriek, the steam from the coffee mug twisting into shapes I didn't want to recognize. This wasn't a break room. It never had been. It was just another corner of its labyrinth, another trick of the light and the mind. "I know what you are," I whispered, my voice rough, tasting of ash and old fear. The words felt like a physical act, a wrenching free. The air in the break room thickened, pressing in on my chest. The smell of stale coffee and burnt popcorn shifted, replaced by something ancient, a damp earthiness mixed with the faint, metallic tang of an old wound. My eyes darted around the room, but the walls were already blurring, the fluorescent lights flickering. The solid surfaces rippled like water. The red bar on the door pulsed again, throbbing, and then it opened. Not a door opening, but a seam splitting, revealing not a hallway, but a cavernous, swirling darkness that seemed to swallow the light. I felt a familiar pull, a gravitational tug on my despair, an invitation to step into the comforting oblivion it promised, but I wouldn't. Not anymore. I had almost succumbed. Now I understood. It fed on me, on my sorrow, on the chasm of loneliness I carried, and that understanding was my weapon. The floor beneath my feet dissolved, becoming the damp, packed earth of the house's deepest cellar, the air suddenly thick with the stench of mildew and something that had festered for centuries. This was its lair, its true face. This was where I had to face it. They were my mother's last sigh, my father's frustrated groan, the echo of my own tears shed in empty rooms. They tried to unravel me, to pull apart the fragile threads of my resolve. I am alone, Seth. I was always alone. No one will miss I. Just let go. My fingers clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. My vision swam, the cellar walls seeming to melt, revealing glimpses of other times, other victims. The entity showed me its feast, its legacy. It wanted me to see myself among them. No, I choked out the single word of defiance against the crushing weight. It was harder than I expected, like shouting underwater. I am not alone. The lie felt weak, brittle, but it was all I had. I thought of the fleeting connections I'd made, the brief smiles, the hands that had reached out, however, tentatively. They were fragments, but they were real. They were not despair. It didn't understand. It couldn't comprehend a refusal of its gifts. It was pure hunger. I focused, pushing back against the flood of grief it hurled at me. My lungs burned, air rasping in my throat. I felt a draining sensation, like a tap had opened in my chest, siphoning away my energy, my will. This was the reckoning. This was the battle for the core of me. I feed on what's broken, I rasped, my voice gaining a desperate strength. I thrive on the unsaid, the unfinished, the unmourned, but I will not be broken for I. My grief belongs to me, not to I, my loneliness. It pulsed with an agonizing intensity, like a living heart in the earth. The cellar floor began to vibrate, a deep, resonant hum that thrummed through my bones. Dust sifted from the ceiling, carrying with it the scent of ancient wood rot and something metallic. A low, guttural moan filled the air, not a human sound, but a sound of pure, ancient agony, as if the house itself was screaming. It was trying to sever my connection to myself, to my memories, to everything that made me me. It was trying to make me a blank slate, an empty vessel for its continued existence. I felt a searing pain behind my eyes, as if my very thoughts were being ripped from my skull. My knees buckled. It was not anchored to the house itself, but to the idea of the house as a tomb, a prison, a place of ultimate despair. If I could shatter that idea, if I could reject its dominion over this place. You are not this house, I screamed, the words tearing from my throat. You are a parasite in this house. It is not your grave. I pictured the light, the sun, the outside world. I pictured connection. I focused on a single, stubborn memory, the warmth of my mother's hand in mine, a simple human touch. The entity shrieked, a sound that tore at reality, shaking the very foundations of the cellar. The air crackled with a malevolent energy, and I felt a sharp, burning sensation spread across my skin, as if 1,000 tiny needles were pricking me all at once. It was a furious, desperate attack, a last-ditch effort to break me. I stumbled, my vision going white at the edges. Had I truly found its weakness, or had I merely provoked its full, unholy wrath? The warmth, like a tiny ember against a winter storm, flickered. My mother's hand. So small, so fragile, yet it burned through the icy tendrils that tried to suffocate me. I held onto it. I gripped it with everything I had left, with a desperation that tasted like rust and salt. The entity screamed. Not a sound, not really, but a tearing vibration in the air, a whine that scraped against my teeth and rattled the fillings in my jaw. It hated the memory. It recoiled from the simple truth of it, the undeniable fact that I was not alone, not truly. The pressure intensified. It felt like being submerged in tar, heavy and suffocating, pulling me down into a thick black despair. My chest ached, a deep, bruising pain. My lungs burned, starved for air that wouldn't come. The walls of the old house seemed to press inward, the floorboards groaning under an unseen weight. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light, agitated, swirling like tiny, frantic ghosts. Every shadow deepened, writhed, threatened to swallow the space around me. I could feel its anger, a frigid wave that crashed over me, promising an endless, aching emptiness. It wanted me to surrender, but I wouldn't. I couldn't. I pushed back. I pictured my mother's smile, her laugh, the way she'd ruffle my hair. I focused on the vibrant colors of her garden, the scent of fresh earth, the sound of birdsong outside her window. Life. Abundant, noisy, messy life. Each memory was a tiny pinprick of light, a spark against the encroaching void. The entity roared, a silent, furious gale. It tried to flood my mind with images of my own failures, my isolation, the gaping holes left by loss. That I deserved this, that I was already consumed. My legs buckled. I fell to my knees, gasping, my vision blurring at the edges. My muscles screamed. But even as I fell, I kept holding on. I clenched my fists, dug my nails into my palms. The pain was real, a small, tangible thing I could focus on and anchor. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing the entity's insidious images away. I focused on the warmth, the light, the simple human connection. I repeated her name in my head, a silent mantra, a defiant prayer. Then a shift. The pressure didn't vanish, but it lessened. The roaring receded, morphing into a frustrated hiss. The air in the house still felt heavy, ancient, but the suffocating weight on my chest eased. I opened my eyes. The walls were just walls. The floorboards were just old wood. It had been driven back. Not destroyed, no, I knew it wasn't gone, but it had been wounded. My defiance, my stubborn refusal to give in, had pushed it away. It couldn't feed on what wasn't there. It couldn't take what I wouldn't give. I scrambled to my feet, my body shaking violently. Every muscle ached, every bone felt brittle. I stumbled, half crawling, towards the front door. It felt tempting, so tempting to just lie down and let it take me. But I saw her face again, clear as day, and I pushed through. I fumbled with the ancient lock, my fingers numb until the tumblers clicked with a jarring finality. The door swung inward with a groan, fresh air. I gasped it in, a ragged, choking sound. I stumbled out onto the porch, collapsing onto the dew-soaked steps. The sun was rising, a pale, anemic light struggling against a bruised sky, but it was there. The world outside was still there. The trees rustled, a gentle, natural sound. A bird chirped a fragile melody. I looked back at the house. It looked the same, but it felt different. It felt dormant, wounded, like a predator that had been starved, temporarily driven back into its den. I knew it wasn't over, not really, but I had survived. I had made it out. Weeks bled into months. The house stood empty, boarded up, an ugly stain on the landscape. I never went back. I moved far away, to a city where the noise and the crowds were a constant, comforting presence. I sought out connection, desperate for it, any connection. I took a job, a mundane existence in an office full of bright lights and chattering colleagues. I forced myself to be present, to smile, to engage, and now I stand in the break room, microwave running, coffee still hot. The hum of the machine is a steady, reassuring drone. The scent of stale coffee and instant noodles fills the air. It's a normal, everyday sound, a normal, everyday smell. A colleague, a young woman with kind eyes, passes me, offers a small, polite nod. I nod back, forcing a smile that feels brittle like thin ice. My hands are steady as I stir my coffee, but inside I'm still trembling. I look out the window at the gray city stretching endlessly, so many people, so much life. It should be enough, shouldn't it? But sometimes in the quiet moments when the office is empty and the lights are, I feel it. A deep, aching certainty that it's still out there, waiting. Has it truly been banished, or merely driven into hiding, patiently biding its time until my defenses inevitably crumble?